Welcome back. We're closing this series on menopause care, advocacy, and what support actually looks like.
And today gets real practical because this is about sleep, strength, partners, and getting dismissed.
The wild part is how many women are told to just push through all of it.
And push through what exactly, because this was not just hot flashes.
Brain fog, mood shifts, intimacy changes, muscle loss, bone loss, heart risk, all of it.
That is a full-body systems failure, not a little inconvenience.
Right, and the frustrating thing is how often it gets translated into psychology instead of physiology.
So the default answer became, maybe you're just stressed.
Which is such a lazy diagnosis when the data is right there.
I keep coming back to that line about women being more likely to get antidepressants than hormone therapy.
That's training, that's fear, and honestly, that's institutional habit.
And the fear came from that massive women's health study fallout, right?
Exactly. It scared physicians away from prescribing hormone therapy confidently.
Which is such a brutal overcorrection if women were left to suffer for years.
And the irony is, for the right patient, treatment can be life-changing.
Like the patient story with the clinic scanner was insane to me.
She lost a huge amount of fat, built muscle, slept better, and got her confidence back.
And she became the loudest success story on social media, which is so human.
Because when somebody finally feels better, they want to tell everybody.
What hit me was the regret piece, that she was angry she waited so long.
That's the quiet tragedy here. Women are often told there is nothing to do.
And then they finally find help 3 hours away, which is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous, and it means the system is failing at a basic level.
But the partner question was really interesting, because that's delicate territory.
It is, because nobody wants to diagnose their spouse like a stranger would.
Also, nobody wants to say, honey, your hormones are acting up, and survive the night.
That would be a terrible opener, yes.
But the advice was actually smart. Notice the change. Don't weaponize the label.
Exactly, lead with care and then bring in a provider.
I like that because it turns the conversation into teamwork instead of confrontation.
And partners can help reduce shame, which is half the battle.
Do you think menopause and the lack of stigma would change if men experienced it?
I think it would have been researched harder and normalized faster.
That is the least surprising answer ever.
But the point is not envy, it's equity and attention.
Right, because this affects roughly half the population eventually.
And at any given time, a huge number of women are in that transition.
Which means this is not niche, it's a mass public health issue.
Exactly, and yet it still gets handled like a private inconvenience.
I also thought the sleep piece was bigger than people realize.
Sleep is foundational, because once it goes, everything feels worse.
Which is why waking up at 3 in the morning becomes a full identity crisis.
It really does, because the brain starts making terrible midnight decisions.
3 a.m. is not a wise philosopher hour.
No, but the body is also genuinely under strain then.
The sleep apnea detail surprised me too, especially in thinner women.
That's an important one because people assume apnea only tracks with weight.
And if you stop breathing in your sleep, that is not a small thing.
No, it is a major health risk, and it deserves real screening.
I'm glad she kept bringing it back to strength training instead of just weight loss.
That was probably the most empowering part of the whole conversation.
Stronger, not smaller, is such a sharp message.
Because muscle is protective, and the obsession with being thin has cost a lot of women.
She basically said she spent years treating thinness like social currency.
And then realized that strength is what actually pays the long-term bill.
Thin is a terrible retirement plan.
That should be on a poster somewhere.
The diet part was interesting too because it sounded very intentional, not trendy.
Protein, fiber, greens, nuts, seeds, and enough consistency to support muscle.
She wasn't preaching some dramatic cleanse, which I appreciated.
Good, because menopause does not need a juice cleanse on top of everything else.
Imagine telling a tired woman to drink celery.
She would absolutely throw the celery at you.
What stayed with me most was the family history piece.
Yeah, that was painful, and it explained a lot of her urgency.
Losing 3 brothers and then realizing your own health is changing is heavy.
It's a lot of grief layered on top of biology.
And that probably made the self-advocacy feel even more non-negotiable.
Absolutely, because she is trying to outpace a pattern she has already seen.
I respect that she didn't turn it into fear, though.
She turned it into discipline, education, and action.
And that's why the line about suffering not being inevitable landed so hard.
That was the thesis of the whole thing, honestly.
The hard part is that people still have to do the legwork themselves.
Yes, and that is where the anger lives, because they should not have to.
But until the system catches up, her resource list matters a lot.
It gives people a starting point instead of leaving them in the dark.
And I loved how she framed non-hormonal options, too.
Right, because not everyone is a candidate, and no one should feel trapped.
Sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress reduction, therapy, it's a whole toolkit.
And the key is matching the tool to the person.
That part felt humane, not just medical.
That's the standard we should expect, frankly.
If you had to boil the series down, what do you think the big shift is?
From silence and dismissal to language, options, and support.
And from shame to normalizing a transition that almost everyone will face.
Exactly, and that normalization changes families, not just clinics.
Because then the husband, daughter, sister, everybody has a role.
Yes, everyone can help make it less isolating.
Even the men who pretended they were not listening all series.
They were listening, they were just pretending to be mysterious about it.
I do think this series did one thing really well. It made menopause feel discussable.
And that is where change starts.
So if someone only remembers one line, it should be that suffering is not required.
And if someone needs a second line, it's that they should ask for help sooner.
That feels like a good place to end this one.
It does, and honestly, it feels like the right ending for the whole series.
Thanks for riding through all 3 episodes with us.
And go have the conversation you have been avoiding, because it matters.
Welcome back, because this one gets practical and a little emotional fast.
We are talking about stigma, missed diagnosis, and what support actually looks like.
And honestly, the shocking part is how much of this is just women being ignored.
Or being handed an antidepressant and sent home.
Which is such a lazy medical move when the body is literally changing.
That was one of the strongest parts of the conversation, because it named the training gap.
Right. Like if doctors are trained to look for psychological explanations first, they keep missing the obvious.
And then the woman starts thinking, maybe it is me, maybe I am falling apart.
That spiral is brutal because it turns a medical issue into a shame issue.
Exactly, and shame makes people wait far too long to get help.
The patient's story was wild, though, because the before and after sounded like 2 different lives.
She went from exhausted, foggy, and disconnected to actually thriving.
And not in some miracle cure way, just the boring things done properly.
Nutrition, strength training, hormone therapy when appropriate, and actually tracking body composition.
The body scanner part was so important, because the scale is such a liar.
It is, and for women especially, the scale can hide huge wins in muscle and fat loss.
That idea of being stronger instead of smaller really landed for me.
It is a mindset shift, but it is also a health strategy.
Because muscle is not cosmetic, it is protective.
It supports bones, balance, metabolism, and long-term independence.
And the fact that women lose that easy muscle-building window earlier than they think is kind of a wake-up call.
Yeah, the idea is not to panic in your 40s, but to stop waiting.
Basically, the body is asking for a better plan, not a prettier one.
That is annoyingly accurate.
The sleep piece was the other giant thing, because it sounded like everything gets worse when sleep falls apart.
Everything gets worse, and people underestimate how much sleep affects mood, insulin, and recovery.
I liked how she did not romanticize it either, like some sleep issues are hormones and some need specialists.
That distinction matters, because not everything is solved by one intervention.
Which is why wellness culture can get weirdly religious about one tool.
Yes, and she was refreshingly grounded about that.
Also, the sleep apnea point was sneaky and important, because people do not connect that with menopause.
Especially not in women who are not visibly overweight.
That was the part that made me go, wait, this can show up even there?
Exactly, and that is why clinicians have to stay alert instead of relying on stereotypes.
Then there was the partner question, which I thought was actually really tender.
It was because loving someone and not knowing how to help is a very real problem.
And the fear is you say the wrong thing and sound like you are diagnosing them.
Which is why the advice was so smart. Notice the shifts, then suggest support gently.
Not, hey, I have decided you are in menopause. Let us begin the courtroom drama.
Exactly, no one wants the amateur diagnosis energy.
But I do think partners help by saying, I see you, and I think we should look into this together.
That collaborative tone lowers defensiveness and gets people to care sooner.
Which is probably why isolation makes this so much worse in the first place.
Yes, and the scary part is how many women still cannot find menopause care nearby.
The waiting list longer than a wall line was insane to me.
It is absurd, because it means demand is there and access is not.
And people are literally flying to see her, which says everything about the shortage.
It also says women are willing to do the work when they finally feel believed.
The wild part is, she had to build a provider list like a community workaround.
That kind of grassroots resource building is sadly necessary.
And then the other huge thread was the family history, which made her urgency feel very personal.
Losing brothers, watching illness up close, that changes how you think about time.
It also changes how you think about prevention because suddenly maintenance is not abstract.
Right, it becomes deeply practical, like I need to stay strong enough to stay here.
That part hit because the whole toolkit suddenly had a face on it.
And that face was not vanity, it was longevity and dignity.
I also appreciated how she kept bringing it back to advocacy because the system is not automatically going to rescue you.
No, you often have to arrive informed, persistent, and a little annoying.
Which is such a terrible job requirement for being sick.
But here we are.
The line that stayed with me most was that menopause is inevitable, suffering is not.
That is the thesis, really.
And it works because it is honest without being dramatic.
It gives people agency, and agency is what stigma steals.
Also, the way she talked about men learning this stuff was refreshing, because this should not be a private, women-only crisis.
Exactly, men, partners, sons, everyone benefits when the conversation is normal.
And honestly, if a third of women are in this transition at any time, this is not niche.
Not niche at all, and not a side issue to push to the margins.
It is one of those things where silence has cost people way too much already.
Which is why the education piece matters so much, especially early education.
Imagine if people learned about perimenopause the way they learn about puberty.
That would change so many late-night panic moments.
And probably prevent 1,000 unnecessary Google searches at 2 a.m.
1,000 is generous.
I think that is why this episode feels like the right closer, because it is not just information.
It is a permission slip to pay attention and ask for help.
And maybe to stop pretending this is something women should quietly endure.
Exactly, because quiet endurance has never been the same as care.
So if we wrap the whole series in one thought, it is basically that the body deserves respect.
And the person living in it deserves support, not dismissal.
That feels like the whole point.
It really does, and I think this series did exactly what we hoped.
Thanks for staying with us through all 3 episodes and all the uncomfortable truths.
And go have the conversation you have been avoiding, because it matters.
Welcome back. This is the final one, and we are ending on the hardest part. Silence costs women years.
And the frustrating part is that a lot of that silence gets misread as anxiety, depression, or just personality.
That line hit me hard because it means the system keeps treating the symptom, not the transition.
Exactly. And then women get an antidepressant before anyone asks about hormones.
That is wild when you say it out loud like that.
It is wild and it is common, which is the worst part.
What I keep circling back to is the scale of it, because this is not rare at all.
It is roughly a third of women at any given time, and eventually it touches half the population.
So basically the most under-discussed giant public health issue in the room.
And people still act like it is a niche women's issue instead of a family issue.
That's what I think men miss, because if you love a mother, partner, sister, or friend, you are in it too.
Right, and you do not have to diagnose anyone to be helpful.
Which is good, because most husbands would absolutely make a mess of that first sentence.
They really would, because the minute it sounds like a diagnosis, everyone goes defensive.
So the move is not, I think you are in menopause, but something seems off, how can I help?
Exactly, and then bring in a clinician who actually knows the field.
Which is another insane gap, because the doctor shortage here sounds almost procedural.
It is a training problem, a confidence problem, and honestly, a care access problem.
So women are driving 3.5 hours, flying in, waiting months, all for basic support.
Yes, and that should embarrass the entire healthcare system.
The compounding pharmacy detail was interesting too, because access changes everything.
It does, because not every option is sitting on a CVS shelf with an insurance code attached.
Of course not, because life cannot be convenient when it matters most.
That is the whole story of medicine, honestly.
What I loved is that she did not present hormones as some magic fantasy pill either.
No, she kept bringing it back to a toolkit. Sleep, nutrition, strength, stress, and then hormones where appropriate.
That is the part that feels empowering instead of helpless.
It is empowering, but it also requires women to become fierce advocates for themselves.
Which is exhausting, because the system should not require a full-time research job just to be believed.
I agree, and yet that is where we are, so information becomes protection.
The part about sleep was huge for me, because once sleep breaks, everything gets louder.
Everything gets louder, and the brain has less room to regulate mood, appetite, and stress.
That 3 a.m. wake-up spiral is such a brutal little thief.
And if hormones are driving it, fixing it can be surprisingly straightforward.
But if it is chronic insomnia, that becomes a different lane entirely.
Exactly, and that honesty matters because not every problem has the same lever.
The exercise shift was another strong one, from smaller to stronger.
That reframing is everything, because women have been taught to chase thinness like it is health.
And then reality shows up with bone density and muscle loss like, hello.
Exactly, reality always wins.
I also think the personal story made it land harder. The family history, the grief, all of it.
It does, because this was not an abstract topic for her at all.
Losing siblings, watching illness up close, and then realizing her own symptoms were getting dismissed is intense.
And that is why she speaks with so much urgency, because urgency came from real life.
I think that urgency is what made her so convincing without ever sounding preachy.
Yes, and she was very careful to keep bringing people back to possibility instead of shame.
Because shame is the real villain here, not hot flashes.
Shame and ignorance, and a healthcare culture that normalized dismissal.
The partner piece mattered a lot, too, because support is not passive silence.
No, support is noticing, asking, listening, and helping her get to a better clinician.
Basically, do not show up as a detective, show up as a teammate.
That is exactly right, and teammates do not make it about their ego.
I keep thinking about how many relationships probably erode because nobody names what is happening.
That is probably true because untreated symptoms can look like emotional distance or conflict.
And then people moralize it instead of medically understanding it.
Which is why normalizing the conversation is not soft, it is preventative care.
That is a great line because this whole thing is really about prevention, not just rescue.
Yes, and prevention includes education before the crisis starts.
That school point is so true, because nobody teaches women what their own bodies are going to do later.
We prepare people for careers, taxes, and parenthood, but not this enormous biological shift.
Which is bananas, because almost everybody will know someone going through it.
Exactly. And if we all know someone, then we all benefit from better understanding.
The most generous reading of this whole episode is that knowledge gives people more years back.
It gives them years, yes, but also quality inside those years.
That might be the biggest theme of the whole series, honestly.
I think so too, because living longer is not the goal if people are suffering quietly.
And the line that stuck with me most was, menopause is inevitable, suffering is not.
That is the line that should be on a wall in every clinic.
Or on a fridge, or in a group chat, or shouted across a family dinner table.
Honestly, yes, anywhere it can interrupt the silence.
So if someone has listened to all 3 episodes, the ask is simple. Talk to the women you love.
And listen without trying to win, fix, or diagnose in the first sentence.
That should be a rule for life, not just menopause.
Probably yes.
I am genuinely grateful we spent this series on something so overlooked and so consequential.
Me too, because these conversations change behavior, and behavior changes outcomes.
And hopefully they make one person feel less alone tonight.
That would be enough for me.
That is a wrap on the series, and I think we ended exactly where we needed to.
Thank you for being here through all 3 episodes, and please keep the conversation going.
Welcome back. We are closing this series on menopause, care, and the ridiculous cost of silence.
This last stretch is really about what happens when women finally get help, instead of being dismissed.
The waiting list longer than a wall part is insane, honestly.
It says everything about demand and almost nothing about access.
And that woman driving 3.5 hours just to be believed?
That is the part that should make everybody uncomfortable.
Because this is not some niche complaint, it is a whole health transition.
A huge one, and it hits sleep, mood, brain fog, bones, heart health, intimacy, everything.
So basically, the body decides to run a hostile takeover.
That is a very rude way to say it, but yes.
What got me is how often it gets mislabeled as depression or anxiety first.
Women are still more likely to get an antidepressant than hormone therapy.
Which is wild if the root problem is hormonal and nobody checks it properly.
And that training gap is real, because many physicians were taught to fear hormone therapy.
The Women's Health Initiative fallout still haunts the conversation, right?
Exactly, and that fear outlived a lot of the nuance.
I also thought the partner piece was fascinating, because people want to help, but do not want to diagnose.
That is the whole art of it, noticing the change without turning it into an accusation.
So not, hey honey, I think you are in menopause and I have read 3 things online.
That would probably go beautifully, yes.
But the bigger point is that support changes the whole experience.
Absolutely, especially when the conversation is normalized and shame is removed.
And the case study was such a clean example of that.
Nutrition, strength training, hormone therapy when appropriate, and a partner who shows up.
And then she is losing fat, gaining muscle, sleeping, and getting her life back.
That is the part people miss, because this is not only about symptom relief.
It is about function, identity, confidence, and whether your relationships survive the transition.
Yes, and if the science is used well, a lot of suffering is preventable.
Which makes the silence feel almost cruel.
It does, but it also makes the advocacy more urgent.
I keep thinking about her saying menopause is inevitable, suffering is not.
That line is the whole mission in one sentence.
Honestly, somebody should print that on a wall somewhere.
Preferably in every clinic waiting room.
And maybe next to it a note that says, ask better questions.
Yes, because women are often carrying the burden of proving their own experience.
That part really gets me, because if a system only listens after you perform the pain, it is broken.
And yet people are still trying to fix themselves in isolation.
Which is why the resources piece matters so much.
Exactly, because education is not a bonus here, it is treatment.
That is a good way to say it.
And I love that she kept bringing it back to strength, sleep, stress, and support.
Because it makes the whole thing feel actionable, not fatalistic.
Which is the best kind of ending for a conversation like this.
And a good ending for the series, too, because this was never just about symptoms.
It was about dignity, access, and not letting people disappear inside preventable suffering.
That is the line I'm taking with me.
Me too, and I hope listeners take one conversation from this and keep it going.
Thanks for being here through all 3 episodes, and for sticking with the messy, real stuff.
We will see you next time, and until then, keep asking better questions.